Hi, and welcome to the second video of our seminar, History of English 2, from Synthetic to Analytic. I hope that the sound quality is now better than in the first video and that you are going to be able to hear me and enjoy the content of this video without any disturbances. In this video, I am going to talk about the first prehistoric phase of the development of English, that is the Germanic phase, where we do not have any textual evidence yet. The first texts are actually only from the Old English period, and this is several centuries before that. We are first going to talk about similarities between languages, so what are the reasons that languages are similar to each other, and how we can actually use these similarities to resurrect dead languages, as I'm going to show you in the second part, using the small example of the so-called Grimm's law. In the last part, I'm going to tell you something about the next week. Right, so let's have a look at similarities between languages. So, for instance, if you take the English word beef and the French word bœuf, or the English word kamikaze, or the Japanese word kamikaze, pardon my Japanese, by the way, you will probably quite easily explain why these words are similar in the two respective languages. It is because they are borrowings, or at least the English word beef is a borrowing from French, and the English word kamikaze is also a borrowing from Japanese, and that's why these two words are similar. But this doesn't always have to be the explanation. For example, if you take a look at the Hawaiian and ancient Greek word for honey, they both have the same form, meli. And if you also have a look at the Hawaiian word kia and the ancient Greek word kion, where both words mean pillar, I'm not really sure that you can say that one is a borrowing from the other language, because Hawaiian speakers hardly could have had direct contact with ancient Greek speakers, right? So this is actually something that you can explain by pure coincidence. This is really coincidence, and sometimes the words for the same thing in different languages are the same or similar for no reason, really. But then there is another group of words that are similar in different languages. For example, here the word that describes the sound that a cockerel does. In English, it would be something like cock-a-doodle-doo. In German, kikeriki. In Finnish, something similar. And in other languages, you can think of, I'm not sure what languages you actually speak, but I'm pretty sure that it would be something similar. This type of words and this type of similarity is based on the onomatopoetic relation of the word and the reality. So sometimes words try to mimic the reality, and the result is then something like that. And because the reality is the same basically all over the globe, the words depicting this reality, in this case the sound of a cockerel, are similar or the same in different languages. But then you also have another type of similarities. In English, German, Dutch, Swedish, Icelandic, Faroese, in Yiddish, in Afrikaans, the word for one of your parents, for your female parent, is something like mother or mutter or moeder and so forth. And these words are not onomatopoetic. It's also not a coincidence. And you could hardly argue that they would be borrowings because these words belong to the very core vocabulary of those languages. And to the core vocabulary belong also words for kinship terms such as mother, father, son, brother, or words referring to parts of the body or the numerals 1, 2, 3, 4, and so forth. And actually, every language has their own words for that, and languages don't generally need to borrow new words for this. So here you need to have a different explanation, and that is relatedness. These languages are genetically related. So English, German, Dutch, and Swedish, and other languages as well, are actually the daughter languages of one common ancestral language, right? And that is the reason why these languages have a similar or almost the same word for something, in this case, mother. And this type of similarity is something that we actually can use in historical linguistics. And in the next section, we're going to have a look at how exactly. Right, but before we start, just a word on terminology. I have already mentioned the term daughter language. So daughter languages are the languages descended from a common ancestor. In the case of the Germanic languages, it would be English, Frisian, German, Yiddish, Dutch, Icelandic, Norwegian, and so forth, are all daughter languages of Proto-Germanic, for example. And in turn, Proto-Germanic or Germanic is the parent language for all these different languages. English and Frisian, or English and German, and so forth, are then sister languages, right? And they all constitute a language family. Then we have the term proto-language. You see, for example, Proto-Germanic in the slide, or Proto-Indo-European. And the words with proto, in this case, mean that those are languages that we have no textual evidence for, that are purely based, everything that we know about them is based on reconstruction, the thing that is the focus of this session. Right. And if we have a reconstructed word or an expression, we mark that in linguistic literature with a small asterisk at the beginning of the word. So that would be the last term on this list. The last thing that I have not mentioned yet is the word cognate. A cognate is a word that is descending, that is in different daughter languages, and it comes from the single parent language. So if you think of the example on the slide before, where we had the different words for mother in different Germanic languages, so mother, Mutter, Mude, and so forth, these words are cognates in the languages. Right. So historical linguistics, or linguistic history in this quote, has been sometimes termed the darkest of the dark arts and the only means to conjure up the ghosts of vanished centuries. And that is actually the case. With the principles of historical linguistics, we are able to resurrect languages or resurrect the way people used to communicate with each other hundreds and even thousands of years ago, even though we have no direct evidence such as texts, books, or recordings. It might just work if we apply the principles of historical linguistics to what we know now, to reconstruct, resurrect dead languages.
It could work!
Exactly. It could work. And it could work because of one thing, and the one thing is regularity of sound change. Sound change is namely regular. It doesn't happen in a random fashion, but it follows certain patterns. And in this video, I'm going to show you how this happens in the case of the Grimm's law, to show you how we can use this knowledge to actually reconstruct dead languages. Right. So we start with a simple example where we have on the one hand side 3 words in Latin, and Latin here represents the Proto-Indo-European languages or language that the Germanic branch descended from, and then Gothic in the middle column that represents the Germanic languages that developed out of the Proto-Indo-European language. The third column then says what the words mean in present-day English. Right, and now please concentrate only on the first consonant of those words, right? So you have, in Latin, you have the verb portare, meaning to go, and in Gothic, you have the verb faran, to go. Then in the second line, you have tres in Latin, and in Gothic, you have threes, 3. In Latin, you have centum, que, and in Gothic, you have hund, 100, right? So portare, faran, tres, threes, centum, hund. All 3 words in both languages mean the same: go, 3, and 100. And if you have a look at the first consonant, you will see that there is a correspondence, right? So if in Proto-Indo-European, here represented by Latin, you have a P, in Germanic, you will get an F. If you have a T in Proto-Indo-European, you'll get a TH sound, here represented by the thorn rune in Germanic. And if you have a K sound in Latin or in Proto-Indo-European, in a Germanic language, you would get a G or a H sound. And this shift is something that Jacob Grimm actually discovered in the first half of the 19th century, and that has been later on named after him, the Grimm's law. The Grimm's law is in fact a bit more complicated than only the 3 changes per te, ke, to fe, the, ge. There are actually these 11 changes happening. So you have pe, fe, te, fe, ke, ge, que, to gue. Then aspirated sounds, b, d, g, to non-aspirated sounds. And then b to p, d to t, g to k, and gue to gue. If you actually take a look at that, you will see that the whole system changes, right? So for example, if you take a look at the second group of sounds that changed, so the aspirated b de g to non-aspirated b de g, they actually push the originally non-aspirated b de g to change to something different, right? So if this group changes, then this forces this group to change as well. And because this p to k has changed, then also this one, the first group, had to change. Otherwise, you would have a conflation of different consonants. And the Grimm's law, as you might see, is only affects consonants, not vowels, right? Right, you can here actually see the Proto-Indo-European or Latin and Greek words, and here on the right-hand side you see the Germanic correspondences. Right, so for example, here you have the Latin word pecus, and pecus, the k sound actually changes to something like ch. You actually here have a combination of two sound changes, so p changes to a f and k to ch, so that you get from pecus, you get fech, right? And this you can still see in German. For example, the cognate of that word is Vieh. And depending on your variety of German, you might actually even hear the ch sound in there if you have the plural of that word, right? So you have Viecher, where you get the ch sound. You can have a look at the different correspondences if you want. I will continue with the basics here. Right, now we know something about the Grimm's law, and we can actually use that and illustrate how the Grimm's law works by looking at cannabis. Right, so on this slide, you'll see that 2 years ago, in October 2018, Canada legalized the use of cannabis, right? And now you might reasonably ask, how is actually cannabis connected to historical linguistics at all? And I will explain that in a moment, right? So, cannabis is actually a Latin word, right? It refers to this plant known as Cannabis sativa. And if it is a Latin word, you might actually expect that word to be inherited also in other ancestral languages of the Proto-Indo-European language, right? And if that is the case, then the Grimm's law might actually apply to this word. So let's see what happens if we do that. Here, only that you refresh your Grimm's law knowledge. You see the different changes. And now let's see what happens if we actually apply them to this word. And more specifically, we're going to look at these two changes from the Grimm's law, from B to P and from K to Ch. Right, so we see that in the word cannabis, we have K and B. So if we move from Latin, which here represents the Proto-Indo-European stage, we will get something like cannabis, right? So K to Ch, B to P. You see that there is the asterisk. That means that we do not have this word written anywhere because there are no written texts in Proto-Germanic or Germanic, right? But we might reasonably assume that this must have been the form of the word in that variety, right? But we can go even further, right? Because the descendants of Germanic, for example, Old English, we already have textual evidence of, right? And so in Old English, this word is somewhat simplified. We lose the ending is, and we also get from ch to h, this sound change. Furthermore, the vowels also change from a to e, so that we don't have cannabis anymore, but hennep in Old English. And this is not where the development stops, but it goes even further in Middle English, where the second vowel, the second E, is dropped. And as a result, the combination N and P actually get assimilated so that we have MP together, right? And the word that was originally in Proto-Indo-European and also in Latin, something like cannabis, is now hemp, right? And what does hemp mean in present-day English? Right, cannabis. So just to sum up, we see that Grimm's law works really in this case. So k changes to h, and later on that develops to h in Germanic languages. We also see that another part of this system of sound changes works as expected, so that b to p in the second, in the b sound of cannabis. By the way, in High German, sort of in the southern varieties of German, there is another change, an additional sound change that shifts final P's into F's, so that you get, for example, something like ship in English, but Schiff in German, right? And this change is also responsible for the fact that you have water in English, but Wasser in German. And this is something known as second consonant shift. And this also explains why you have Hanf in German, but hemp in English. Right, then we had the assimilation of N and P turns to mp, right? So hemp, because of the bilabial context. And we also see some vowel changes, so that the original A in cannabis changes to E in English. And what we also get, I'm sorry that you are not able to see the beginning of the words because of the video, but we also lose an ending. So the original Latin is gets lost over time, and in English we have hemp. Right. So now you see that we actually here can combine two of the sources for similarities between languages that I mentioned in the beginning. We have, on the one hand, actually a borrowing. So the fact that cannabis in English and cannabis in Latin are the same or very similar is due to the fact that English speakers borrowed that word into their vocabulary. But at the same time, in the vocabulary of present-day English, we also have a genetically related word, hemp, right? So hemp is the cognate of cannabis. And so that you have hemp and cannabis alongside each other in the lexicon of present-day English. Right. What about next week? Next week, that's the 28th of April, we are going to focus on the so-called comparative method. We are going to use the knowledge that we've gathered right now, and we are going to have a look at the logic behind studying languages without any textual evidence. So how to work with dead languages. In order to do that, please read the preparatory text by Mallory and Adams, Discovery of Proto-Indo-European, about 10 pages, should not be that much. And if you've watched this video and read the preparatory text, then take a look at the first handout that will be uploaded on Blackboard. It's called Handout 1, Comparative Method. On that handout, you will see a number of cognates, and your task will be to try to reconstruct the proto-form. All of the information that you need are in the texts and on the handout, and ideally you should be able to solve the puzzles, the questions that are on the handout. If not, or if you have any other questions, feel free to contact me at any time. This is something that applies always, right? So this is the plan for next week, and I thank you for watching this video, and take care, and goodbye, and goodbye.